You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hello, my name is Uwe Schulte, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this episode of our series, Let's Talk Sustainable Business. It's brought to you by the Conference Board. Today, I'm welcoming back Jacob Sterling, Senior Director and Head of Ocean Decarbonization and Innovation at Maersk. In our last episode, Jacob gave an overview of all the sustainability integration into Maersk business, and we started to talk about the challenge to decarbonize sea freight logistics. And we promise to dive a bit deeper into this today. So welcome back, Jacob.
Thank you.
So please remind us about the greenhouse gas challenge of sea freight and the Maersk ambition that we talked about last time.
Sure. So in short, the greenhouse challenge of shipping is that we emit around 3% of the global CO2 emissions. So more than most countries. And for Maersk alone, we emit around 0.1% of the global CO2 emissions, which means that 1 in every 1,000 tons of CO2 emitted to the atmosphere comes from one of our ships. Not something we are particularly proud of, but we are keen to do something about it. And we have set a target to get to net zero for the shipping business as well as our entire business by 2040. And we've also set some milestones for 2030 where we say that in the shipping business we want to cut our carbon intensity in half between 2020 and 2030. And we want by 2030 to have 25% of our fleet or cargo moved on green fuel.
Now, I remember that you had this ambition for 2050, and suddenly you cut off 10 years. How come?
Yes. After we have set the first net zero target, we did a lot of detailed work on trying to understand what are the potential ways of getting to zero. We had some idea before setting the first target, but then we dived into the details with a view to actually put up more of a detailed roadmap on how to get there. And in that process, we could see that if we really went all in, there was actually a good chance that we could do it 10 years earlier. And therefore, we cut 10 years of the deadline. That's really the short version. But it's basically our obligation to do this as fast as possible. And we think that 2040 is probably as fast as physically possible.
Now let's talk about this in more detail, because this is not very clear. In the last episode, we talked about that you have started ordering vessels that can run on alternative fuel. What's the challenge there? Let me say, when I was living in Brazil, we could run a car on petrol or on methanol. Sorry, not methanol, ethanol, which was always a strange experience. When you filled up your tank, it sounded as if you were drunk. It smelled as if you were drunk. So that technology has been around, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge for shipping, just to take one step back, if you will, is that we are today using 100% fossil fuels, 100% oil. And so you can say the first thing you do when you get into this journey is you say, okay, so what's the energy source going to be for the future? And we basically have two main sources of energy that we can choose from. One is renewable electricity, either in its raw form or turned into hydrogen or fuel. Or you could use biomass, somehow converted into a fuel. So those are the two main energy sources. And we've looked deeply into that to see what are really the options there. And there are a lot of different ways that you can convert biomass into fuel. I mean, we have biodiesel today that is made from rapeseed oil or palm oil or even used cooking oil or food waste. And we also have other technologies that can make, say, methanol or ethanol or other products. The issue for shipping is that um, none of this has the sufficient scale. And also, if you talk about, for example, ethanol or another alcohol, methanol, which we are focusing quite a lot on, then you cannot use those in an existing ship engine because whereas you can put it in a normal combustion engine, as you just with the example you gave with the car, then you do need to modify your engine and you do need to modify your tank system to be able to use it on a ship safely. So we were really in a situation where we could say that the types of fuels, such as biodiesel, that you could use in a ship engine as of today, they are probably not able to scale to the extent we need, because shipping will need shipping used today around 300 million tons of fuel oil. And I think that if you just said, okay, well, let's just scale up biodiesel to cover that, then we would have other issues that we would not want to deal with, such as land use changes around the world. So biodiesel, which is the fuel we can use in existing engine, is probably not scalable and cost effective for the long run. So we started looking into alcohols, ethanol and methanol, and other
Before you
fuels.
go
Yeah.
on,
Yes, sure.
let me just because it was naughty of me, of course, to say, in Brazil I could use alcohol or fuel. You're using diesel engines,
Yes.
and you can't, even in Brazil, you can't replace alcohol into a diesel engine because the way the explosion is managed
Mm.
is significantly different. So
Yes. Yes.
I was sort of being too much of a challenger there.
No, I think it's a good point you're making, because actually the technology, if you want to change a two-stroke diesel engine on a container ship to one that can run on diesel and methanol, it is actually not that big of a change, and the engine exists today. The thing is just that none of the ships that we have are, of course, fitted for that because they were designed for something else. But one of the things we found out in this process, this looking into the details, building a roadmap process that I talk about, was exactly that you do have ships running on methanol. There's a small fleet of methanol tankers that has a methanol engine and runs on part of the cargo that they carry around. And we looked at methanol and we could see that. So I talked before about that we could either get our energy from a biosource or from a renewable electricity source. And we could see that methanol was one of the fuels that could be made from both pathways. Methanol can be made from renewable electricity, which you turn into green hydrogen, and then you add a CO2 molecule, then you have methanol. But you can also do it via various chemical processes where you convert biomass into methanol. And that made it a very sort of flexible fuel, actually. You could say that many different pathways that gets you to the same molecule, if you will, which makes the scaling challenge a little bit easier, or you have more options. So yeah, as I mentioned in the previous episode, we got to a point in our journey where we decided to order a ship that could run on methanol. And the reason for doing that was really that we can see that it can scale now. The technology is ready now. And since we want to have impact in this decade, this is a fuel that is really good for us now.
For me, we're getting into too much detail, and sometimes my prior profession gets through. The energy density is, of course, lower in methanol than when you have diesel.
Yes.
So you suddenly have a storage problem on your vessels, don't you?
Well, I mean, that is something you can probably design your way out of. But you're right. Your fuel tank needs to be twice the size for methanol.
Twice. Wow.
Twice, yes. And then on top of that, you also want to have a diesel tank, because you want to be able to switch to diesel. Actually, you have to for safety reasons, because methanol is such a new fuel and diesel is such a well-known fuel. You need to be able to switch back to a diesel if need be. So you need some more tank space on the ship. But we cannot expect that everything can go on as usual just with a slightly different fuel. We will need to also make tweaks to the designs of these ships, and it's not a massive change. You just need a bigger fuel tank.
Yeah, I get that. This need to have two tanks and run on
Mm.
both, that's because of the transition, because you're not sure that everything works. But eventually, you would expect that you completely switch over, wouldn't you?
Probably, I would not. I would not speculate on that. But we would always need, I think, at least for the foreseeable future, a diesel tank. Also because we need diesel for ignition of the fuel, whereas diesel self-ignite in a two-stroke engine, methanol doesn't. So you need a little bit of diesel just to get the combustion going. Back to your point on the ethanol car in.
That's how it works. I
Yes,
see.
exactly.
You
So
started
that's
with
another
diesel.
reason. Yes.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't realized. Okay, so let's just spend a little bit more time on that methanol.
Hmm.
Um, this is very interesting, because you've explained, and I don't think we can go into the details of the different path routes. But let's just take the renewable energy for a second. So
Hmm.
what I hear you say is, here's a wind farm, for example.
Hmm.
it it creates the energy. I have a stream of uh, what which I combine with the. Oh,
Hmm.
sorry, I
Hmm.
should say, you electrolyze water and you create hydrogen.
Yes.
That's the starting point. What happens then?
Then you basically take the green hydrogen and put it through a chemical process where you combine it with a CO2 molecule to create the methanol. And you
Uh,
can say that, I mean, one point that is important to make here, because and without getting too technical, is that if you have renewable electricity, uh, if you can, you would always want to use that directly, as you do in electric vehicles, because then there's limited energy loss. If you then choose to convert it into hydrogen, which is like the first step away from direct electrification, then you lose a bit of energy, but you get something that you can maybe more easily transport, or at least you get a different molecule, right? Uh, and and then if you then can use the hydrogen directly, because that can also be used as a hydrogen as an energy source, that's fine. But hydrogen takes up so much space that it would take. I mean, we talk about double the fuel tank for methanol. It would be way more for hydrogen. So in some instances, you need to convert it further and take the energy loss that comes with it and convert it into methanol or ammonia, for example.
hmm.
So yeah, so that's the basic pathway, and it's all about having the renewable electricity source, of course, and then making sure that in that process you lose as little energy as possible, because you want, of course, to preserve as much energy as possible to not having to put up too many wind farms or so forth.
No, I understand. When I listen to this, then you will have a competitor as customer of methanol. That's the airline industries.
Hmm.
But one could turn that argument the other way around and say you could collaborate with them to build that infrastructure.
Yes, I mean, actually, aviation is one that very quickly springs to mind, but actually, if you just look at decarbonization overall, there is a lot of sectors that depend on electrification. And really, this is a type of electrification also for shipping, even though we do it in a sort of we don't use electricity directly, we use something produced from electricity. So you're right. I mean, there will be a massive need from so many sectors in electrifying their businesses with renewable electricity, and we are one of them. So there will be competition, and of course, as you say, preferably also a lot of collaboration, because it's a common challenge we all have.
Yeah, no. You see, the interesting thing about what you also said is that your choice of methanol
Mm.
also explains why in private cars and probably even lorries.
mm,
Methanol isn't the option, and hydrogen isn't the option. It's the
mm,
direct use of electricity is the option
mm,
because
mm,
of the intermediate. That debate to keep all these different fuels open is fine when we talk about all mobility,
mm.
but not for normal passenger cars.
Exactly.
So, tell me, obviously, you must have looked into the supply of this, and that
Mm,
must have helped you to cut 10 years of your time
mm.
scale. That's fascinating.
You would think that, right? And in a way we did, but just to be completely open and honest with you, I mean the global market for green methanol today is non-existent. I believe that globally there's around 30,000 tons of green methanol being produced globally, and we don't know what it's being used for, but it's certainly not being used as fuel for shipping. For the first container vessel that we have ordered, we need around 10,000 tons of fuel. And for the next 12 that we have also ordered, we need close to 500,000 tons of methanol fuel. So yes, we have engaged, and we had engaged in a lot of dialogue with potential suppliers prior to ordering the first ship. But we could also see that we were stuck in a chicken and egg dilemma where, you know, could we order a vessel when there was no fuel to put in the tank, and or and on the other side, could we expect someone to build a green methanol factory when there was no customer? And we decided that we wanted to take a step forward and break that dilemma by ordering the first ship, and also committing to only ordering dual fuel ship as of now. And dual fuel is the key here, because that's also, it's like an insurance premium in a way, because we didn't know whether we could get the green fuel, the green methanol, but we knew that if we didn't get it, then at least we could still sail the ship on regular diesel until it became available. So that's also the beauty of the dual fuel engine that we use for these ships. Um, but but it did trigger a lot of attention when we then made this commitment and ordered this ship, and we managed later in the same year, so last year, to make an agreement with a company in Denmark that would then produce the 10,000 tons of fuel for the first ship. The ship is being built, the facility is being built as we speak, and in a year from now it should be ready. And we are also deep into dialogue, and we have made a number of so far non-binding agreement with various companies on producing green fuel that will actually, a green methanol that will actually take us much beyond what we need for the first 12 ships. So realistically, within the next 3-5 years, we will count the global production of green methanol in the millions of tons, not in the thousands of tons.
Wow, and I praised you the last time, and I have to repeat it because that ordering of those ships uh, has precipitated something in the market.
Mm,
Having been a procurement guy myself, of course, you need to know um, where you get your stuff from,
mm,
and to go this way without being sure is bold,
mm,
but also it actually drives then the suppliers to say, hey, there's a
mm,
new market and I can do
mm,
something, and then
mm.
investment will follow, and it has already followed. So that is absolutely great. Now, let's just talk for a couple of minutes on that's the vessel going across the ocean. But you talked about the last time we spoke about that you're now providing end-to-end service to your
Mm.
customers. So what do you do about decarbonizing that?
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because you can say the vast majority of our emissions from transporting goods around comes from shipping. That's where we're biggest, and we have a lot of ships. But it's 700 ships, 750 ships maybe, and they're all controlled from the headquarters in Copenhagen. So we have a very large degree of control on what happens with those ships, what fuels gets into the tank, and so forth. Whereas if you look at trucking, for example, we have thousands and thousands of suppliers of trucks. None of them, or very few of them, will be owned by us. Some of these suppliers will own one truck or 5 trucks. Some of them are located in places like Germany, where EV trucks might be coming first, but some others are located in Africa or elsewhere, where it will be a lot harder. So we have committed to also decarbonize the rest, the whole land side, and also the air business that we have, the terminals that we have, and we're building roadmaps for that as we speak. And we have also actually, talking about trucks, ordered around 400 electric trucks, which I believe was one of the biggest single orders of electric trucks actually, to get started on this. The trucks are not with a battery capacity yet, where they can go wherever you need them to go and so forth, but you can use electric trucks to go on more fixed routings between, say, a terminal and a specific warehouse. So that's where we start. So you can say the emissions are less on the land side, but the complications are way greater.
Because the complexity is so much higher, and
Exactly. Yes.
and the number of players involved.
Yes. And we
Yeah,
don't have all
that's
the answers. We don't have all the answers to that yet. Definitely not. But we know we need to do it, and we are building our roadmaps and beginning to take these actions, investing in EV trucks and so forth.
that is a large number of EV trucks. Is that in Europe or is that elsewhere as well?
It's in the US.
In the US?
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Okay, now we talked about that you are big and you have a fair share on all of that. I guess probably your market share, and correct me if I'm wrong, is around 15% of sea freight. That is impressive. But on the other hand, there are 85% that are not Maersk. And if we want to decarbonize sea freight, it's great you go ahead, but the others have to do something similar, don't they?
Sure. And yeah, I think our market share is probably closer to 20%, but it doesn't really change the question because whether it's 80 or 85 that is left, you're completely right. But I mean, we are all part of the same industry, and we share many of the same customers, and our regulators are the same. And for many, some of the mindsets are also the same. I think in container shipping, there's actually a good group of companies that are willing and able to do something in this space, to take real action, and that is also absolutely necessary. That we of course all move in this direction. But I'm actually quite confident that we all will, and I would love to see this become something that we really compete on, to be who can be the greenest, the fastest, and have the best green products for our customers and so forth. That's what we need. That we can work together on making sure that the standards are right and that the regulation is pushing for the right thing. But we should really compete on this like everything else, so that we can get even smarter faster.
Now that is a good intention. I hope every other player sees it the same way, because this is a huge challenge ahead of us, and I'm just wondering, when you look back on your journey now, basically started in 18, I guess, when you got very serious about that net zero target. What would you say are the main insights, learnings you've taken from an outsider coming into Maersk, that you could tell other companies when they look at their net zero commitment, what they should look out for, and what is good insight and what should be avoided?
That's a very good question, and I think that the main point from me is really to get to tangible action as fast as possible. Because it's only when you get into the real action that you actually learn stuff. You can spend so much time analyzing, calculating, strategizing on what to do and where to start and how to de-risk and all of that. But you only really learn when you do something. And I think the first vessel that we ordered, it's one small container ship. It's going to trade in Northern Europe between Germany and Finland. How hard can it be, right? And we learned that it's super hard to get off the ground with this. And there are so many questions that we need to answer that we didn't even realize as questions before. But we only get to understand these questions and then, of course, get to the answers when we get into the action. We hadn't thought so much about where to store the fuel, how to move it from a storage to the ship, and all the regulatory things that might be in this. I mean, to do these projects where you actually act and get learnings, I think is very valuable and something that we at least get a lot of value out of.
It sounds like the good old saying, think big, start small. But your emphasis on start, do something rather
Yes.
than just have wonderful PowerPoint slides.
Exactly, and it's a lot easier to change the course if you're actually moving, right? At least on a ship, you cannot change the course unless you have some speed in the ship. And this is the same. I mean, we need to start going towards the target in a real way, and then we can learn, and we will learn along the way that this was a wrong choice, this was a bad decision, this didn't work out, and so forth. But if we don't move and take those learnings, then it will be much harder when we then eventually start.
So one of the really encouraging things from your action that I heard you say is that we will be in the millions of tons of green methanol in the not so distant future. And that is something that is extremely encouraging. Do you think that there might be major obstacles on the way that are worth mentioning, and that, for example, governments have to play a more important role to speed this up?
Yes, and that's just to stay with the millions. I mean, just for our business, we expect to need 6 million tons of fuel by the end of this decade. So that's the figure we go for, and hopefully there will be much more by that time because others would use it as well. But you're right. I mean, governments can play a big role in this because as it is today, and will be for the foreseeable future, green fuels will be way more expensive than fossil fuels. Because there's no carbon tax on shipping, for example, and that actually doesn't really make sense, because so you have cheap fuels that pollute the planet, and you have green fuels, or you're going to have green fuels that do not, that are much more expensive. So we are calling on governments to develop a carbon tax, a global carbon tax on shipping, and we've proposed a level of around $150 per ton of CO2, which would be equivalent of around $500 per ton of fuel oil. So a very significant increase, because that's what we think is needed to level the playing field at least level the playing field between the fossil fuels and the green fuels that we're going to have. And that's very necessary. And I think that can drive things a lot forward. On top of that, of course, we need governments to be open to the new green fuels, to allow them into their ports, and to allow that it's being used as flag states for ship owners, right? But I think the carbon tax is really crucial, and we are very happy to see the EU's work on inclusion of shipping in the EU ETS, We're deeply engaged in that and supporting that. But we would, of course, much prefer that it happened at the global level in the International Maritime Organization, because that's the global regulating body for shipping, and they've been dragging their feet, or rather, the member states of the IMO has been dragging their feet for too long, and that's something we need to change, because we need a carbon tax that will make it very painful not to go green.
On that critical note, I would say, because that's an even bigger challenge than getting the supply for green methanol, I guess. But it is something that it's worthwhile engaging in, and I don't think the number 150 is exorbitant. It's something that we all know, that the cost of using fossil fuel is much higher, the environmental and social cost of that. So thank you so much for giving us some hope and a perspective on net zero for container freight. That is something we will cherish.
Well, thank you, and it was a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, and we wish you all the success that you need. It's for us as well. Thank you. So for our audience, if you enjoyed the episode, please remember to subscribe to our podcast series, or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. Thank you for listening, and please join us again when we talk about sustainable business. For today, goodbye.
That was Let's Talk Sustainable Business.